Hello, it's Ren Presents time. I'm your host, Ren, and today we continue with the Hazards of the Old Ones, Part 2, Chapter 10, Heron. It's almost 5 in the morning. I'm up. I've got two little Boston Terriers staring up at me like I want to go potty, but they cannot potty because outside is a whirling dervish of chaos, that raccoon that comes into our yard every night and eats our bird feeder seed. And my mom is like, oh, why don't you just shoot him? What do you mean? I'm not gonna shoot him. That's not gonna happen. We've tried to humanely relocate this wayward raccoon, but it never works. He's too smart for the traps that they put out. So every night, here he comes, and I'm like, okay, fine, he can eat the bird seed that's laying on the ground, whatever. The dogs are just gonna have to wait until dawn to go potty. They've pottied plenty, so they're good to go. Anyways, let's proceed with the story, shall we? Last week, Carahill and Madame Kylos arrive at a scary place in the Midlands of Cana known as the Hazards of the Old Ones, an area rife with old stories, with ghost stories, with mysticism, and heavy with things that had been done in the past. It's a pretty area, but the area is scarred by things that once happened there, with the Black Abbess, the leader of the Black Hat Sisterhood, the lady who developed shadow tech from a fairly innocuous occurrence to something that is pretty dangerous and pretty potent. And she created these 6 holes in the mountains, these artificial caves, if you will, where she collected shadow tech that she milked from Vith girls that she was tormenting, basically. And then eventually the Vith and the 24 remaining Grand Abbesses of the Sisterhood of Light attacked, and they knocked the Black Abbess's temple to the ground, where she was doing all this crazy stuff, forcing her to flee into the holes that she had created. Inside the holes is just this impenetrable darkness and these ancient snares that the Black Abbess created that were meant to keep out the sisters and the Vith. And that's exactly where Carahill wants to go, is inside one of these holes. Because deep underground, deep under the mountains, these gentle, pretty hills, is a place known as the Heart. And in this heart are magical artifacts known as the Brightstones. And Carahill needs to get his hands, or his flippers, I should say, on a Brightstone. And in order to get it, they've got to go in there and fetch one. And there's a specific reason why he needs Kylos, per se, among anybody else, because Kylos is not a Vith. Kylos is a commoner from Onaris, a Johnny as they're known, and Kylos isn't bound or subject to these ancient snares that are in the Hazards of the Old Ones. So she can walk where other people can't just because of her lineage. That's what they plan on doing. While Carahill was explaining all this to her, they were beset upon, well, not beset upon, but visited by 4 demons, a cat, a monkey, a flamingo, and a big-ass elephant, who didn't really do much except sort of watch as Carahill regaled Kylos with these scary stories of the Hazards of the Old Ones. And one of them started talking, saying, "Don't go in there.
Don't go in there."
But we know that Kylos is going to go in there, because Carahill talks her into it, says it's important, so she agreed. That was last week. This week, we return to the star-spanning exploits of Captain Davage and his Countess Sigillis, and we see more of Sig falling into the rush with her pregnancy, a little erratic behavior, her tendency to want to barge in on Captain Davage's meetings and so forth. We're going to see all of that come to a head in this chapter. Very short chapters, only 4 pages long, and normally I would just continue on to the next chapter, but the next chapter is pretty long, so we can't do that. We're just going to do this short one, keep it short this week, and then next week we will have a much longer chapter. In the event, let's proceed immediately. Part 2, Chapter 10, Heron. Before morning bell, the Seeker blasted out of stellar Mach outside of the Heron system. Heron was on the edge of a massive, energetic nebula. The charged gases and dust made for a sparkling, colorful display. Beyond the nebula was Zaffin space, the enemy's territory. Trimming the helm, the huge ship bared down on the system, moving in a gale. Davage and Sigillis ate breakfast together in their quarters, Sig sitting there with a huge bib so as not to spot her gown. As much as she complained about her gowns, Sig treated them tenderly, always careful not to stain or damage them, and whenever one got destroyed, she took it personally. The gown Carahill had stolen in the grove was still a sore point. She had 4 wardrobes full, even surpassing Lady Poe in the sheer volume of gowns that she possessed, while Poe tended to keep her gowns in the soft blue, red, and green range, and Countess Pardoc's old Blanchford gowns tended to be always white or cream in tone. Sig spanned the color spectrum. She had a good number that were completely black, while others were pleasing in soft pastels of varying shades. She also had a few that were garishly hued, shockingly bold, and skirting the boundaries of good taste. During their travels, if she came across a bolt of interesting fabric, she usually bought the bolt and took it home, and soon she'd have a new gown. She'd come up with a new gown that was designed to help her bowl better, and the idea of designing clothes took flight in her head. She began sketching gowns and even was toying with the idea of creating her own fabrics and patterns. She often went down to the factories in the village with an armful of sketches and swatches and often assailed her thoughts upon their designers, who patiently listened, though they probably wished she'd stayed in the castle. She also did her hair in the elaborate Blanchford style when she wore a gown, though she didn't have to. Her Silvertech allowed her to set it in place in a matter of seconds. Dav suspected she liked wearing her gowns because she could go around and not wear sandals. Her large petticoat covered her bare feet completely. The only shoes she ever wore were her little bowling shoes that she looked so odd in. Once they finished their breakfast, they went to the bridge, where Lieutenants Larson and Verlin were both waiting by the op station. Though they were competing for the same job, they seemed to be pleasant enough with each other, making small talk and getting acquainted. Davage called them into the conference room. Sig, nearly at a run in her lovely brown Blanchford gown, glided into the conference room ahead of them, not wanting to give him a chance to shut her out.
Sig, where are you headed?
Seating themselves, Davage came in last. "Good morning," he said.
"You're not shutting me out again, Dav,"
she telepathied as she allowed him to seat her. "Good morning, sir," Larson and Verlin both said. "Morning, morning. I trust you remember my Countess, Sigillis of Blanchford?"
"I wasn't planning on doing that, Sig. I was going to invite you in, honestly."
"I do," Larson said. "Good morning, great Countess." Sig nodded in a courtly fashion.
"So you say. Let's see you throw me out now. Ha!"
"My Countess is an invaluable asset here on the ship, and if you are to be first officer aboard the Seeker, you must accept and value her presence as I do." Her knowledge of Zaffin society and her warcraft is without peer. She's also not too bad in a fight. Now, anyone for a cup of coffee? They all nodded. Davage made a cup for everyone, and after they had drunk a bit, Davage spoke up. Doubtless, you have perused our destination.
I think you're cute, Dav.
I have, sir. The Marines will be very appreciative of our presence here, Verlin said. Yes, sir. However, I am wondering, is it usually the duty of a main fleet vessel to intercede in a minor Marine interdiction mission? Larson asked.
I'm going to tear you apart as soon as this silly meeting concludes. Sig, not now, please.
Davage smiled. Normally, it is not. The Marines are fully capable of handling such things on their own. And should they require assistance, the fleet will always be on station to assist at once. However, there are certain matters that you must be made aware of. Davage worked a few controls at the table, and a large 3D map of the Heron system popped up and slowly spun. Can anyone tell me where we are? They looked at the map. We are approaching the Heron system, sir, Larson said. That is the Tamarack cluster at 12 a.m., and at 6 a.m. are the kills. Indeed. Well done. What else strikes you about the Heron system?
Dav.
They studied the map. Heron is an energetic T-Tauri star in the F spectral range. No life-capable planets due to the youth of the star, and because of the Great Heron Nebula hanging at 10, Verlin said. And? Davage asked. Larson rubbed his chin. We are very near to Zaffin space.
Dav! Sig, stop this. I am trying to conduct a serious briefing.
Correct, he said. He pressed a few buttons and the map spun. More specifically, Heron is rather close to the planet Xandar. Davage hit a button, and a planet just within Zaffin space began blinking. Xandar. Yes, at 1 a.m., barely 4 light years from Heron, you two, of course, are aware of my ongoing issues with House Xandar.
I love you, Dav.
Yes, sir, Verlin said. However, I thought the Princess Marlith was dead. As did I, Larson said.
I love you too, Sig. Now, shh.
She appears to be dead, true enough. However, before we sortied, I received a rather disturbing message from Hezru, King of Xandar. To sum up the conversation, the king was wanting to keep the hostilities going, to use his words, and introduced me to his 11th daughter, Princess Vrock. Apparently, our battles over the years made House Xandar a great deal of money. Creation escapes me as to why. Sig chimed in. You see, House Xandar has fallen out of favor with the Black Hats. A promising snare operation aboard the foreign vessel Triumph, authored by Princess Marlith several years ago, went badly, and many Black Hats were killed. In revenge, the Black Hats fell upon House Xandar, seized their assets, condemned Marlith to death, and swore eternal revenge. They have hated House Xandar ever since. To expand, you both probably heard of the Triumph affair that the Countess refers to, yes? Princess Marlith enlisted the aid of the Black Hats to perform an extensive Shadowtech snaring operation on the Triumph. Marlith did not like Demona of Ryle, the captain of that vessel, and she was the captain's girlfriend, Sig said dryly.
She was not. Sig, will you please drop that? She was too. Dav, don't try to deny it.
Yes, well, the plot was uncovered a bit prematurely. Princess Marlith, apparently eager to brag, began boasting before the Black Hats were fully ready. The fleet and the sisters interceded, boarded the Triumph, and over 20 Black Hats were killed in the ensuing battle. That was the first battle in recent memory where a force other than that of the Sisterhood of Light had met and defeated the Black Hats. For that loss of face and station, they were exceedingly angry with the House of Xandar and have been so ever since.
Davage and Demona sitting in a tree.
Davage gave Sig a dirty look and continued. Impoverished after the Black Hats took all their assets, House Xandar was able to enrich itself afresh by banking on their daughter's ongoing battles with me. And so, this 11th daughter of theirs, Princess Vrock. I understand that the 11th daughter is considered very unlucky in Zaffin society, Verlin said. The king did mention that, yes, Davage said. Can you expand upon that further, Lieutenant? Aye, sir. Xandar lore teaches that the 11th daughter is the accursed daughter, the worthless daughter, the bringer of unluck and ill tidings. Lieutenant, Sig said, interrupting. She continued on. In the Xanthar pantheon of gods and goddesses, Lieutenant, Sig said again louder. Verlin stopped her oratory and turned to her. Great Countess. Sig smiled. Lieutenant, what is your bowling average? Verlin was open-mouthed, shocked, and blushed. My bowling average, Great Countess? We do not take of bowling in Remnath. Sig narrowed her eyes and ground her teeth. Liar, she said.
Sig, holy gods, we do not openly speak of bowling. You know that. You have just embarrassed her. So, she's been bowling since she could crawl. I'll bet, and I wish she'd admit it.
Countess, Davage said, we will discuss this further later. Lieutenant, please continue. She straightened her marine coat and went on. As I was saying, the 11th goddess of the Xandar pantheon is Mab Sornath, goddess of pestilence, infidelity, infertility, and bad luck. Oh, goodness. The 11th daughter is something they take seriously on Xandar, as the 11th daughter was the acolyte of Mab Sornath. Well, sounds like nonsense to me, Davage said. Regardless, I told the king that I had no interest in fighting this innocent girl, that I fight as my duty calls. He, however, was quite determined and said in no uncertain terms that Princess Vrock will not stay innocent for long and that they will seek a fight in League space, shake a tree or two. So, sir, you were thinking that this unknown vessel might be your Princess Vrock? Verlin asked. That is my belief, hence our presence here. We shall ask the Marines to withdraw, and we shall investigate this ship further. I'll not have any needlessly endangered over this Zaffin entanglement. Davage turned the map off. We are set to make contact with the unknown vessel in 1 hour. I will await your thoughts and opinions on the matter as we engage. And remember, I want nothing taken for granted. Aye, sir, Verlin said. Larson nodded. Dismissed. The two officers stood and exited the room. Sig, now that they were alone, allowed her courtly demeanor to fall away. She sat there sheepishly and smiled. Hi, Dav. Sigillus, Davage said in an angry tone. Oh, I'm in trouble, aren't I? Yes, indeed. What were you doing just now? Nothing, Dav. Just telling you that I love you. I know you love me. Now please allow me to do my job unmolested. Your job, sir, is to be my lord. She stood and put her arms around him. Can't a countess dote upon her husband? Oh, certainly, but there are serious matters afoot. Now, I am certain that Lieutenant Verlin enjoys bowling. All ladies do. However, it is not spoken of. You know that. That is stupid, Dav. Regardless, that is the custom, and especially in stodgy Remnath of all places. I'll expect you to apologize to her in private later. And additionally, I am tired of you harping me regarding Demona of Ryle, a woman who came and went years before you happened along. Yes, well, you should pick your girlfriends more carefully. You should have anticipated my coming, either by vision or dream quest, and dismissed her, knowing that I, one day, would be your wife. Davage shrugged. The rush was manifesting itself full force. Sig's emotions and her logic certainly were teetering a bit. You really think this vagrant ship has a Xandar connection? She asked. I do. It's just a feeling. Sig kissed him. Oh, I trust your feelings. Should I change into a bodysuit and be ready for action? I'll not have another gown destroyed. If there's any action, as you put it, you will be safe in our quarters writing it out. Sig smiled and grabbed him by the collar. Incorrect, sir. I will be right at your side, as always. You always bring this up, and you always lose this fight. Davage smiled and lifted her off the floor. That's fine, I suppose. Better to keep an eye on you. And with that, we conclude Part 2, Chapter 10, Heron. So, as mentioned earlier, Sig is a little out of balance as her pregnancy advances, and Sig knows full well that bowling is a popular but unstated game. The blue people of Cana just love to bowl. Just love it. But they pretend like they don't like to bowl. It's a common game, a game commoners play, and blues don't do things that commoners do. Yeah. But in secret, they love to bowl. And Sig asking Lieutenant Verlin what her bowling average is a big breach in protocol, but Sig is kind of loosey-goosey at the moment, as her rush comes and goes, and she's not really caring about things like that. She just says whatever's on her mind at the moment. She also mentions Demona of Ryle and the Triumph affair, so that is a bit of backstory. Back when I first created the League of Elder, I had written it as a teleplay for another more well-known science fiction franchise that will remain nameless at this time. Demona of Ryle is a last vestige in the story of that trademarked science fiction franchise that will remain nameless. She was a captain from a foreign ship that was passing through and she and Captain Davage became acquainted, and they had a brief but torrid affair, and then Demona of Ryle continued on with her ship, never to be seen again. Sig, in the original League of Elder story, Sig was always terrified that Demona of Ryle would return one day and claim Davage's hand, and it just plays on her mind. And now that the rush is coming on in full force, just whenever she even hears the word Demona or the name Demona of Ryle, she just sort of gets all defensive and freaks out a bit. So Demona of Ryle was part of a teleplay that I wrote, I don't know, back in, when was it? I think it was actually before the turn of the century. I don't remember. But that's where the League of Elder began, was in this little teleplay. And I even turned it in, and I got an accreditation from the Screen Actors Guild, and it just sat in my filing cabinet gathering dust. But then years later, when I was looking for some tax information, I came across this bound manuscript and read it, and that's when all these ideas sprang back into my head, and I completely removed all of the trademarked stuff from this science fiction franchise that will remain nameless, and the only vestige of it that's left is Demona of Ryle, whose name has been changed, obviously. There's nothing to do with anything outside of the League of Elder, but that's just an interesting tidbit that she used to be someone else. She used to have a different name. But she's gone. That story is gone and done with. Just a footnote, if you will, of the League of Elder. And then all that followed, all these 14 books later, that sprang from that one teleplay. Lieutenant Verlin tells Captain Davage about the 11th daughter, how the 11th goddess of the Xandarian pantheon of gods was Mab Sornath, who was a goddess of pain, not of pain, but of misfortune, disaster, bad tidings, and the 11th daughter was supposed to be the chosen acolyte of Mab Sornath. We've heard Mab Sornath's name several times in this book, if you're perceptive. Mab Sornath was a goddess worshipped on this space station known as Zal 88, which orbited the planet Gothan, where the city of Wham is located. And if you've read my previous books, you know where Wham is. We've visited Wham several times. And while Gothan was being terraformed into a habitable planet, the descendants of the House of Clovis orbited the planet in this space station, Zal 88, and they worshipped a goddess known as Mab Sornath, a cat goddess. And Mab Sornath bestowed great knowledge and insight on the people on this space station. And eventually, when Gothan was ready, most of the inhabitants went down to populate the planet, but a few stayed aboard Zal 88. And eventually, the House of Xandar became jealous of the riches of knowledge and wisdom that were to be had on Zal 88, and they attacked it in force and came in and slayed everybody. And when they got there, everyone dead, they couldn't understand the knowledge and riches that were there, so that eventually they just blew Zal 88 up. And they took this goddess that the inhabitants of Zal 88 worshipped, this cat goddess Mab Sornath, and added her to their pantheon and made her a goddess of destruction and misfortune. That's just a little footnote going forward. And we've also heard Mab Sornath's name before as a demon who escaped from the Windage of Kine, which is like the hell of the gods. Mab Sornath was one of the names that was missing. Mab Sornath starts with an M, doesn't it? Interesting. Next week, we continue as the story ramps up. Chapter 11, The Heart. And here in this much longer chapter is chronicled the adventure of Carahil and Kylos as they dive into the hazards of the Old Ones, seeking a bright stone. So next week is where all that comes to a head. Until then, this is Ren Presents. I'm your host, Ren. Peace out. I guess I better go to bed.